in the late 60s with the Vietnam War, suddenly there was this kind of proliferation of activity around protesting of the war that moved into culture very quickly. You know, young artists were being sent off to Vietnam. They were escaping to Canada. Around the same time and growing out of that was the free speech movement, in Berkeley, the Black Panther movement, finally coming out of that, the feminist movement. So that I would say between 65 and 70, there was protest culture emerging across the United States.
So how do you think that played out in like the Peace Tower?
Well, the Peace Tower, to me, the kind of formal issue that is of interest is the way in which de Souvreau at that time was doing large outdoor sculpture that really led to the establishment of the notion of public art. Not just him, but artists like de Souvreau. And so that construction is very different than the representation of the actual imagery. But the whole piece, which is the collaboration, the engagement of various viewpoints, the allowing of people to come in with a particular form of expression that collectively made a whole, was, I think, very interesting structurally, and it was part of an initiative to change the nature of art and the nature of art audiences. In California, one of the very interesting things that happened was in the early 70s, I think it was 65, that California passed a master plan for education that basically guaranteed every young person in California a free education. And so what happened was, around that time, and because a lot of people were trying to get out of the Vietnam War draft situation, people in large numbers in California started going into the colleges. Because of that, and because there were equal numbers, remember now, of men and women going into art school, because there was equal numbers of people of color and working class people. It's a huge issue. So you get all of these who don't really have the same level of education and enculturation and kind of traditional art practices. So you get all these kind of like new groups of people coming in, and what happens is that they begin to invent form and express themselves in ways that are perhaps not typical, but a whole lot more available to a mass audience. So when Mother Art, for example, begins to do their art in laundromats, or Leslie Labowitz and I, or any number of people, begin to do their stuff on the streets in front of City Hall, we're basically, on the one hand, interested in an audience at that point really excluded from the galleries and the museums. Museums have changed a lot, but at that point really excluded. And we're also interested politically in enhancing the voice, for example, of women or of people of color. There's a third thing that I think is very important, and that refers back to the fact that we want to do art in a different place. We're Marc de Souvreau, and we want to put an artwork in the middle of a ravine, or we're Alan Capro, or we're Judy Chicago. We're going to do it in a house in Hollywood. So artists there was a whole push to open up the venue for art. Okay, so the feminist movement in California, I think, came from a couple of sources. One is feminist art education, primarily at Cal Arts, before at Fresno, started by Judy Chicago and many other people involved. And then the protest movement of the Art and Technology Show that resulted in an exhibition that was a very important exhibition about kind of historic women painting and women's role in art. You have to remember, at that time, people didn't even think there were women artists. People couldn't even name women artists. And so just the acknowledging the presence, past and present tense, of women as cultural producers was very important. The Women's Building was one very important structure, Feminist Studio Workshop, all of the women's galleries. So there was alternate worlds, just like down in Watts, there was the meeting at Watts Towers and Watts Community Housing Corporation and so on, were being formed as alternate institutional structures to support different people and different people's views of life. But the manipulation of mass media for any activists was kind of a key part of their arsenal of strategies. So we, Leslie and I, thought a lot and deeply about how violence against women was represented in the media. And we began to create performance works that were meant directly to take place within and on television,
Mm-hmm.
and were to challenge prevailing cultural myths and attitudes towards women and towards violence against women.
Yeah.
So we sort of would apply a fairly complicated media analysis, and then we would design an event like in Morning and Enrage
Yeah.
that we knew no matter what the
Mhm.
media was going to get because they liked the visuals.
Yeah.
And yet we also understood that we would have to intervene
Mhm.
in strategic ways with the way the newscaster would present this. So
Yeah.
we had to basically reframe
Mhm.
the way people thought about what they were seeing on television. So it was those performances and the way we use media was always part of our political
Mhm.
strategy, but it was also a real interest in how artistically you could play with forms of cultural, mass cultural expression. And I have to tell you that to frame In Morning and Enrage only as an act of protest or violence against women
Mhm.
is to not understand the complexity of artists who were political operating during that time.
Mhm.
We were directly inspired by what Chris did and what Ant Farm did, and
Mhm.
we all knew about what each other did.
Yeah.
So we were looking at how art, performance art, operates within a media surround,
Mhm.
and how you simultaneously subvert it.
Yeah.
All of us, all three of these groups, Leslie and I, Chris Burden and Ant Farm, were all thinking
Mhm.
about that form of media manipulation and subversion.
Yeah.